Well, g'day. Today I'm going to be talking about conditioning. So conditioning for developing athletes is probably the number one go-to. But it's rarely, however, the number one thing spoken about when an athlete speaks about their progress, right? We talk about killer sessions and that sort of thing, but not so much the conditioning, but it's the conditioning that holds the whole thing together. So in our sport of triathlon, so many have great difficulty getting conditioning right because we read too much. We hang out in groups too much. We don't focus enough on our conditioning. People misunderstand conditioning and try to use it as a fitness tool. We vastly underestimate the whole picture when we look at developing performance only from the perspective of pure speed, right? Because there's more to speed than just the speed work. There's about 5 other components to contribute to it. So I'll put it out there and estimate 90% of the general triathlon population do their conditioning work too fast or too hard. Whether they're in groups or whether they're listening to their ego or what other external situations are putting pressure on it, we tend to go too fast. Too fast to develop great conditioning and too slow to develop power and speed. Nowhere land, like junk to an extent. So, you know, if you're an age group triathlete listening to this and you consider your conditioning work on the bike, for example, to be, let's say, 32 kilometers per hour, I'm sorry, but you're kind of kidding yourself. That's not conditioning. It's drawing from you. It's deadening your legs. It's making you slow because of the neuromuscular fatigue that it's leaving behind. We need to do our conditioning work easier than that. So it's not drawing from us, it's adding to us. Now, I've heard the rhetoric that training slow makes you slow, but I don't buy that for a second. I've been in this sport long enough to know different. And even in my own case, I've experienced different. So energy will only go so far. It's not an endless supply. If it drains, it wanes, right? So we need to keep that check and balance in mind. So if you're draining it, doing your conditioning work too fast, then you're waning when you need the quality out of it. We can't hit the registers that we need to hit in our quality sessions because we've done too much neuromuscular damage, going too fast when we're supposed to be going slow. Now that's obvious, right? But maybe not. Even today, with our capacity to measure and analyze, athletes are still notoriously bad at quantifying their energy outputs and balancing it so the output is sustainable and moving towards development instead of away from it. We think development is one path forwards, but it's not true. It's not always that way. It sometimes astounds me as a coach how athletes move further and further from their own development, driven by projected outcomes instead of paying attention to their own current state of homeostasis. So homeostasis is critically important because the danger is plateaued development that can go on for years, lead to people leaving the sport without ever realizing their potential simply because of their belief in short-term outcomes. I want this now. I want to push to this level now. This sport doesn't work like that. And if we want to talk about a model that works, we first have to talk about what is sustainable, what maintains the consistency, what maintains the physical rage, what maintains the psychological rage, what brings us into homeostasis so we can keep developing, what keeps the energy in, energy out in balance. And people these days are more interested in their power curves, but that says nothing about the longitudinal capacity to build killer background, killer oxygen carrying capacity, and aerobic underpinning strength. So these are all the areas that we can't see, that are in the background, that are hidden in the substratum, that we need to be aware of because they are what causes our outcomes when we add that icing, when we add that speed, when we add that quality. And here's a more athletically profound question, perhaps. How fast can I go for low oxygen cost? And I know we've spoken about that before, but it's a key question, right? I guarantee you, if you get strong and you get fast for low oxygen consumption, the rest of the game will play ball. But it's a far less glamorous question, isn't it? Hey? It's far less glamorous than the speed sessions and the quality sessions. We tend to look at pros, for instance, and want to emulate their killer sessions, but we don't seem willing to do what they did to get it, which is often a ton of background work on conditioning. No conditioning and you have no support foundation. Like a house built on sand, it can fall apart at any moment. And houses built on sand slide into the sea. So it's just to be aware of that. It's just to understand what creates this killer strength, this killer aerobic capacity that a lot of great athletes have. And when we train with better athletes, what we're often doing is training with better conditioning. Training at their conditioning speed won't be yours. What you see is not what you get. And that's where we get it wrong. We think we need to emulate what we're seeing. But if they're years ahead of us in terms of conditioning, then doing their speed won't help us. Now, it all comes back to your energy levels. How do I make it sustainable? How do I get the homeostasis I need to keep developing? Well, there's an old saying, where focus goes, energy flows. You need to pay attention to your conditioning work. You need to put your focus into your conditioning work. And this doesn't mean we take our eye off the ball speed-wise. It just means we hold our attention. We don't get sidetracked, right? And in the opposite to your intense sessions, you need to make sure you're doing that work easy enough so that it's strictly adding to the sustainability of your overall program. Creating the fertile ground for the homeostasis that we need to keep this whole thing moving. If your conditioning is making you too tired, you're going too hard, period. That's the end of it. Well, at least from where I sit. So we need to ask a simple question. Did that session add to me or did it subtract from me? Your gut has the answer. Your gut has the answer to that question, not your head. Your head will lead you astray because it's only interested in what's out there. It's not interested in what's happening in here. So we need to pay closer attention to our bodies and the energy in it, and less attention to our monkey brains. Monkey brain will always tell us it's not hard enough. It's only interested in the projection. It's only interested in what's out there. It's lousy at dealing with what is. So this is not rocket science, right? Use your body signals before you measure it, and then feel it. And then once you've felt it, then measure it. Is it drawing energy or recirculating energy? They're simple questions, but they're very profound athletic questions. Deep down, we all know when we're drawing on our energy. We also know by intuition when we're going easy enough for energy to circulate, to percolate. Oxygen is a good example, right? Can I breathe through my nose or not? And if not, you're probably going too fast on an easy run. But this isn't what the ego wants to hear. The ego wants to see the numbers on the Garmin. It's not interested in whether you can breathe through your nose or not, but it's an incredibly simple anchor to keeping the homeostasis in flow. We always think of energy as a case of purely physical, but if you have a stressful day at work, for instance, or you get into an argument with your spouse, your husband or your wife or your children, you'll soon notice how with even no physical training at all, it can still drain our energy. That's the nature of energy. So energy is not specifically linked to the physicality either. Human beings are energy conductors. Athletes need to learn how to play their energy like a violinist plays a violin, right? It's a depth touch, and there's a required awareness. There's a required amount of space that we need to get all the information that we need to move forward in homeostasis in a sustainable way, in a consistent way. And burning the candle at both ends is not a great idea, is it? But often we pile up the stress, the intensity, and the habit of going too fast in our conditioning sessions on top of each other, like a layer upon layer, like a lasagna, like a fatigue lasagna. If you happen to be an anxious type, as many athletes can tend to be, then the awareness around your energy is critical, right? Often the deficit in energy is at the cause of the anxiety, and the anxiety is at the cause of the deficit, a mutually destructive draw. And you don't need to change it. You just need to be aware of it. You just need to add it into the picture. Because I tell you what, type A personalities are great until their energy is at Z. And that's what happens. Eventually it runs out. We run on too high our octane. Eventually we run out. Eventually the tank is empty. Anxious types will be drawn to push themselves hard to alleviate the anxiety. It's a two-pronged destructive attack on energy and development. You have to have enough awareness to know when to take the foot off the accelerator and let the body and the mind coast in neutral for a bit. Stress is not a signal to push harder. Although it does alleviate it, and it's a great outlet, it's not a good way to push the accelerator flat to the boards. But regardless, this isn't a shot across energy athletes' bows in terms of managing energy, productivity, and sustainability. I'm not trying to speak against what you should do, but if you pay real attention to allowing yourself to go easy enough to let the energy recirculate, you'll find that it's probably a lot easier than you've been going. So you might want to test it out. You might want to slow it down, concentrate on form, concentrate on relaxation, concentrate on releasing the tension. A long ride of 25 kilometers an hour, let's say, for instance. What you say? That's a waste of time. Is it really? A long run, for instance, in enough presence of oxygen, so only breathe through your nose if I asked you to. Yes, that easy. Can you do that? Test it out. The mix of all of this depends on the individual. We all respond differently to intensity, but one thing is certain, we all need conditioning. And another word for conditioning is recirculation of energy, using your own power to develop the energy carrying capacity of your tank, of your specific tank. Simple math, right? But you have to add to it correctly and successfully and sustainably and consistently and with awareness. And if you recycle your energy, don't just piss it away on conditioning sessions. Conditioning sessions are a test for you to put your monkey brain on the back burner and pay attention to what your body is telling you. This is your opportunity. Go slow enough to listen to your instincts, to listen to your intuition. And if you do that, when you're actually under the pump on the red line, that habit of paying attention to your body will pay off with huge dividends. You are what you practice. When you slow down, you get the chance to practice. You get the space. It's not congested. And finally, groups are great for fun, don't get me wrong, but keep one thing in mind. The shoe that fits one person pinches another. Thanks for listening.